It's clearly a difficult situation, isn't it? And I'm just wondering whether or not we really do have an anti-Semitism problem, really, in this country. Now, we're joined by a campaigner against anti-Semitism, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Thank you very much. Great to have you on board. Look, does Britain have an anti-Semitism problem?
Well, I think certainly Britain does have something of an anti-Semitism problem. And that doesn't mean that everybody in Britain is an anti-Semite. In fact, quite the contrary. I think most people are disgusted when they see these sorts of attacks taking place. And they're right behind the police who are looking for the perpetrator. But British people who are Jewish have long known that they need to watch over their shoulder, really. It's not because they necessarily might get beaten in the street like this. Anti-Semitism takes a number of different forms. And if I tell you that as a Jewish person growing up in the UK, I've been used to synagogues, Jewish schools, Jewish community centres, all requiring razor wire perimeters, CCTV all around them, guards outside them even, constant checks on who's coming in and out. It should give you an idea of the sort of thing that is basically normal in the UK and across Europe. Jews know that they're a target for anti-Semites, whether it's street violence like this, or even worse, perhaps, terrorism where people are trying to blow up Jewish places, kill Jewish people. That's happened across Europe already.
Do you think that there's a perception, maybe, that one form of racism is almost better than the other, right? So, you know, you see things about Islamophobia or whatever, right? That's obviously deemed to be catastrophically awful. Indeed, it is catastrophically awful. But there seems to be maybe a bit of a perception that anti-Semitism is less bad in a way, which is wrong, obviously. But do you feel like that? Do you feel as though that's been an issue for us in this country?
I think that anti-Semitism is different from other kinds of racism. In fact, most kinds of racism have their own unique features. So anti-Semitism is sometimes lumped together with all racisms. For example, we'll have heard those famous words during the Corbyn leadership era of the Labour Party, that he was against anti-Semitism and all forms of racism. It was a well-used formula. That was a way of trying to minimise anti-Semitism by saying that there was nothing remarkable about it outside of other racisms, and that the Labour Party, being an anti-racism party, therefore couldn't be anti-Semitic. That was the sort of Corbyn defence. But there are unique features of anti-Semitism. We only need to look back within living memory. I'm the child of somebody who had to hide from the Nazis in Italy, where you've called me on holiday now today. My father was hidden as a child in a convent so that he wouldn't be taken to the concentration camps and killed at the age of 5. Now, this is a unique part of Jewish history where 6 million Jews in Europe within living memory were wiped out because of anti-Semitism. And today we face different kinds of threats. Racism like what you've seen in those videos of that man, that suspect, who has been beating Jewish people on the street, through to racism in politics, which we've seen. We've seen it on the hard left. We also see it, of course, on the hard right. Nazism hasn't necessarily gone away. It's changed and it's different. When you see far-right anti-Semites today, it's still a problem for Jewish people. But I do think that for some people, there is a sort of hierarchy. And I think one of the reasons for that is, it's generalising a bit, but many racisms take the form of assuming that the minority you're persecuting is somehow worse than you, stupider than you, somehow less good than you. And while that is part of some anti-Semitism, there's also a dual track where many people think that Jews are manipulative, rich, controlling, powerful people, effectively people who are above you and making your life worse. And so I think that in that respect, anti-Semitism often has this dual effect where people assume that Jews are at once subhuman or less good than other people, also manipulative, cleverer, more controlling than other people. And that makes it very hard to fight in one blanket way.
Yeah, that's
really
interesting distinction there. Can I just ask you mentioned we're not just seeing it on the streets, but in politics as well. What is your assessment of the moment of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party under Keir Starmer?
Well, certainly Keir Starmer's an improvement on Jeremy Corbyn in terms of how the Jewish community feel about where politics is going in the UK. But that's a pretty low bar. Many Jewish people, in fact most that were surveyed during the era of Corbyn's leadership, were extremely worried about the Labour Party and the prospect that they may even have come to power underneath Corbyn's lead. So obviously Keir Starmer's doing better than that. I think Keir Starmer's really said many of the right things, but he's got a tough battle because he needs to try to unite the Labour Party for its own electoral success in the future. at the same time as not getting close to the people that were at the core of the problem with the anti-Semitism issue. And many of those were on the hard left. And therefore, I think he's trying to toe a very fine line. Now, he's said many of the right things, as I said. He needs to do the right things as well. And some in the Jewish community are encouraged by what he's done so far, but others have said that he's acting a little bit too slowly, and by now there should have been much tougher moves towards fully eradicating and kicking out that part of the anti-Semitism problem from his party.
By Jonathan Sacerdoti, anti-Semitism campaigner. Thanks so much for joining us this morning on that really important issue.
Yes, well, I thought it was fascinating, actually. I thought it was a really interesting take on events. I think there is that perception, obviously wrongly, I think there is that perception of one form of racism is worse than another form, and I think that...
Yes, certainly. I think you only have to look at the attention that different forms of racism are given in the media to realise that that very much is the case.